Hello everyone and welcome to Module 2, Unit 5, Managing Diversity. This is the second unit in Module 2 and we continue to talk about relationships within organizations. This time we'll be talking about it from the perspective of diversity within individuals, across individuals rather. Some of the topics, or the way in which we'll handle this for this short video lecture, is we'll talk about diversity and why it's important, setting the scene. Then we'll talk to some of the barriers, some of the things that still interfere with our ability to have diversity within organizations. And finally, we'll talk about the implications for managers and management, how to be an inclusive manager and how to be a manager that values diversity. Now, you've done a fair number of readings for this module and looked at some other, and you will or have already looked at some other material. But I want to highlight some aspects of this issue by providing you with some background information around diversity, why it's important, and also some of the things that continue to interfere with our ability to manage or to support diverse organizations. So let's start with a brief discussion on why it matters. Why does it matter that whether or not we have diversity within our organizations? And whether or not as a manager you're paying attention to diversity is something that you are keenly responsible for. Well, let's think back to when Justin Trudeau was sworn in as Prime Minister of Canada, and he gave a speech where afterwards he was asked by a person in the media, why was it important to you to have 50-50 representation, gender representation, male and female, on the cabinet? And his response was, because it's 2015. So one of the reasons why this issue matters is because we still have a problem. That's what Justin Trudeau, I feel, was highlighting fairly well with his response to the person in the media. We're at a time in history when we have a diverse population within Canada. We have a diverse population certainly within the Toronto area, if you're taking this course from somewhere local to York University. And we definitely have a diverse population within York University. And the fact that diversity isn't always represented, especially at higher levels of leadership and higher levels of management, is a problem because what it has a lot of implications. It means that individuals who are aspiring to and moving through their careers do not see examples that represent them at higher levels and may not see as many options available to them. It also has implications for the way that business is done and the perspectives that are taken into account when making decisions. So it's a problem and it's an issue that managers need to be aware of because it continues to matter. We have a problem with diversity with regards to race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, parental status, and so on and so on and so on. Now, there are some folks who argue and who use a business argument in order to support the need for diversity at higher levels within organizations. And this argument is anchored in a series of studies that have looked at organizations and how they perform, depending on either the board looks like or the top executive team looks like, how much diversity is within those ranks. And over, these studies have determined that things like having more women on boards or having more diversity within top management leads to, there are economic rewards, that there's productivity to be had from these types of arrangements. You get diversity of ideas. You get diversity of thought, so the processes and the decision making. And you also get a company that represents the clients more thoroughly if you have people from a range of backgrounds. So that is another argument. So we have the argument that it's the right thing to do because the world should, at every level, should represent the people within it. But then we also have this business argument that a number of academics are supporting through research that companies actually perform better when they have diversity among their leadership. So I've noted that a few ways in which people are diverse within this slide here, but I want to briefly show you that there are many, many dimensions on which people can be diverse, and we have not even captured it here on this slide. But I don't want you to think that diversity. I don't want to leave the impression that diversity is only related to race, gender, and ethnicity. And sexual orientation perhaps, but there are many ways in which people are diverse. There's diversity of age and physical ability. There's diversity of language, and all of these things. These are all factors that inform who we are and who we become, and can be important elements of an organization. Something that adds value and can add a great deal of positive outcomes. The potential for positive outcomes in terms of getting more ideas available, getting people with different insights all sitting at the same table. So that's the case for diversity, setting the stage and the scene for diversity. So I want to talk for a few minutes, and this is where your readings will really help to support some of these ideas. I want to talk for a moment about some of the ways in which we still have barriers to diversity within organizations. Now, of course, there are explicit stereotypes, and the article you read by Sheryl Sandberg will go over some of these. The idea that there are ways in which we continue to believe that people differ simply based on some sort of characteristic about them. And I've put here this picture of a man and a woman and a baby, because I think this is one of the easiest ones to grasp when we think about it, that we often make assumptions about the careers of men and women based on their gender. So we might offer a promotion that requires a person to move to a man because we might believe it's easier for a male to get up and move a family than it is for a female to do so. So we have all sorts of expectations and stereotypes that are simply not true across the board. They are stereotypes. They are not actual facts. So this goes back to something we've already talked about when we were talking about communication in Unit 4. The idea that we need to always be mindful of the fact that everybody is an individual, and there's more variance even within a demographic group, so be it women, than there is across demographic groups, men to women. So there's diversity of all kinds, and stereotypes do not hold. And if we start to make decisions about people based on stereotypes, we will not be making accurate predictions about career and about motivations and about all sorts of aspects that are important to management. Another flip side of this stereotype, I see the baby in this picture, makes me think about the fact that often men are penalized for taking on greater parental roles within at home. If they take a leave from work, for example, or they announce that they're leaving work or because they have to pick up a baby from daycare. These break gender stereotypes. They break expectations, and there can also be consequences for men in that respect. So he doesn't take his job seriously. He's always leaving to go and pick somebody up. So all of these, so it works in multiple directions. And it's really important to be aware of the fact that these stereotypes are just that. They are stereotypes and don't actually represent any one individual. So before we move on to the next little bit of learning here, or next thing that I want to highlight, I want to go through ask you to consider this riddle. A father and son are in a horrible crash that kills the dad. So this is quite a sad little riddle, but here's a riddle that I think exposes some of our stereotypes, some of our biases. A father and son are in a horrible crash that kills the dad. The son is rushed to the hospital. Just as he's about to go under the knife, so he's about to have surgery, the surgeon says, "I can't operate. That boy is my son." The question is, who is the surgeon? So when you ask this question, often people have a difficult time answering it. Some will say, well, perhaps this boy has two dads. Some will say, oh, maybe it's a stepdad. And I find it quite amazing that it takes a while, or it's not everybody in a room, or that there are I find it difficult to see that this is that this is can sometimes cause people difficulty. The response, of course, is that the surgeon is the mother. It's the mother of the son, of the person who's come in for surgery. And the reason this is difficult is because surgeon, when you think of surgeon, you have an archetype, or you have an expectation of what a surgeon looks like. And that a surgeon's, the base rate, they're often male, but I think we're actually, those numbers are actually correcting a little bit now and becoming a bit more equal. But historically, and in movies and in media, they are often male. So it takes a moment for your mind to adjust to the fact that there's another option here, for another parent to have been involved in this scenario, right? So this is an interesting riddle that I think exposes some of our expectations. And essentially, what the issue here is that we have a set of implicit beliefs. So at the level of stereotype, or kind of our overt understandings of how things go and how things should be, right? There are things that you've heard said out loud, or that you might even say out loud yourself. X people are like this and X people are like that. Those are stereotypes. But implicit beliefs are things that lay below the surface. They are our beliefs that we're not entirely aware of, but they exist, and they inform the decisions that we make. So while I say to you that, when I gave you the riddle, there's this, as soon as I say there's a surgeon, you have an implicit understanding of what a surgeon is and what a surgeon looks like. And it's not that you don't believe that women can't be surgeons. It's just that your mind doesn't go there. That's not the first place it goes, because you have this understanding of what a surgeon is that's not consistent with the gender of female. I'll try another exercise that to illustrate this point. Think of a tree, right? Think of a tree, any tree. There's a tree that came to mind for you. There's a tree that came to mind for you that has a lot to do with your experiences with trees. Now, our experiences with trees are largely governed by where we grew up, the part of the world that we grew up in. Having grown up here in Canada myself, when I think of a tree, I think of something like a maple tree, a nice big trunk going up into a canopy of big green leaves. When I think of tree, that's what I think of. It's what I draw. It's what I think about. It's the first thing that comes to mind. My mother, on the other hand, grew up in Jamaica. And when I ask her to think of a tree, she quite likely thinks of maybe a palm tree or a mango tree, a tree of a different variety. Because we have different implicit understandings of what it means to be a tree. All right, so let's take that back to people again. When I say leader, think of a leader. What pops to mind for you? Again, this is going to have a lot to alter based on your experience with leaders. But here in North America, most of our experience with leadership has been with a certain demographic. The demographic is typically male, typically ethnically European in heritage, often tall, so there's often a physical characteristic associated with that. So when I say think of a leader, you have an implicit idea of what a leader looks like. It doesn't mean that you don't believe that women can be leaders, or that people who are not necessarily tall can be leaders. It simply means that you have an expectation that's built on your experiences. That's what implicit beliefs are. And implicit beliefs inform our behaviors in surprising ways. A lot of our judgments are made based on these beliefs. They're there for a reason. These beliefs are there because they're shortcuts. They help us to make decisions when there's a ton of information, but sometimes they can lead us down paths that are less than ideal. So if you've taken, which I believe you have, you've taken human resource management, you would have talked about a number of selection biases. You would have talked about things like the similar to me effect, the halo effect. All of these, what underlines the biases that we talk about in these variety of spaces, are our implicit beliefs. You can actually explore your implicit beliefs in the challenge activity that I have within this unit on the website. There's a bunch of researchers at Harvard who talk to us about, or who talk about uh, who've devised a way to measure, I should say, implicit beliefs. And you can play around with a few of the activities they have on that website in order to test out your own beliefs. Now, what they've done is essentially they've created a test whereby they pair things together. So they'll pair um, a word with a face. And if the pairing is easy, it takes you a very short period of time to respond. And you respond by touching one of the keys on your keyboard. And if the pairing is difficult, so if the pairing is inconsistent, so let's say, for example, the pairing is female and leader, that's a more difficult pairing than male and leader because of our experiences with these pairings. So it'll take you, your reaction time to pair the words female and leader would take you longer than it would to pair the words male and leader. And that's what the implicit apperception test does, and that's what you can take a look at and play around with. There's a particular exercise on social beliefs that I find really interesting. It'll give you some feedback on your own social beliefs. But you do have to register for the website and agree to participate in a study in order to go through that activity. So I leave it as optional, but again, I think it's a really useful activity. So what does all of this mean? Okay, so we understand that diversity is important, that diversity will support all sorts of outcomes that are really important to us from a societal perspective, but also important from a business perspective. But we have things that get in the way of diversity within organizations. We have our explicit stereotypes, and we have our implicit beliefs. So what can you do? What are some of the things that you can do to become an inclusive manager? And again, you have some readings that support some of these ideas, but let's unpack a few. And particularly, I'm thinking about the Australian Workplaces study that can give you that has some great practical ideas in it. But here are some things that I want you to think of with regards to the material we just covered. The first is be aware of your own biases. Now, there's an upside and a downside to that. I think it's important to be aware of your own biases so that you know you have them. But awareness itself doesn't stop us from applying them, right? So awareness alone is not enough to cure you of your bias. But awareness at least gives you the motivation to stop and pause when making decisions, which I think is particularly helpful. The second bullet here says, get to know your people. This is back to the idea of building communication and building trust. If we have relationships with people, we start to see them as beyond the stereotypes. The stereotypes no longer apply, and we start to see them as individuals. So again, it's worthwhile getting to know the people that are within your organization, to manage people as individuals that you spend time with and that you understand on a personal level in order to be able to motivate them and to organize work for them in ways that match with who they are. Encourage a culture that values diversity. So within your organization, you'll want to walk the walk and talk the talk to make sure that you're talking about the value of different ideas, the value of having multiple inputs, the value of having diversity within a team. Encourage this so that everybody is on the same page with this idea. And you can do this just by talking, but you can also do this with point number 4 here, which is celebrating differences, acknowledging all of the different traditions and rituals and ideas that come from the people within your workforce, right? So I think there for a time, I don't know this actually to be true, that I was going to say that there's a time where we kind of had this not wanting to talk about culture and outside experiences within organizations. I think this might have been more of an American perspective, but bringing cultures and rituals and celebrations and holidays into organizations can be really helpful in helping to make these different experiences things that we are open to, things that we value, rather than things that we ignore or things that we are uncertain about. And finally, the last tip here is very similar to something that you would have heard Daniel Kahneman say in an earlier unit. Have clear processes in place. We know that our decision making is flawed. We know that we are at the mercy of stereotypes and implicit beliefs. So let's make sure that we put processes in place that help to make sure that we are always considering things thoroughly, that we are always considering multiple viewpoints, and that we are minimizing the potential for these significant errors that can be made based on our own stereotypes and our implicit beliefs. All right, those are the big ideas for Unit 5. This is the end of Unit 5. Please make sure that you spend some time working your way through the rest of the material within this unit, the reading and the material within the various websites. And I look forward to seeing you in Unit 6. Take care. Bye-bye.